Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, we recap the Mets' regular season after 101 wins. Steve Gelbs joins us, and also Kevin Acee, who covers the Padres for the San Diego Union-Tribune, will join us as well to preview the massive series coming up against San Diego. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. The regular season is in the books. The Mets win over 100 games and are set to play the Padres at home this weekend. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And who better to finally join us than Steve Gelbs? Gelbs, I know this week for you is mayhem. It's not just Jets pre- and post-game that we do. How are you holding up, man?
Yeah, man, this is what it's all about, right? I'm excited. And I'm excited that I finally was able to get on the Mets Pod. We have been trying to find a time that works, seems like all season. But to be honest with you, now I can reveal that I just wanted to be the first postseason guest. And so I was holding off and making up excuses so that we could finally get to this moment, and here we are.
Well, first off, we, the Mets Pod, owe you a gigantic thank you for correcting Keith on air when he forgot that he was on this show. So there's no other way that we could start by simply saying thank you, Steve.
Yeah, guys, I mean, we always have so many fun moments with the booth, but that was one of my favorites, not just because I had listened to the episode recently with you guys interviewing Keith, but we had done like 7 promo reads in a row a week before with, hey, Keith Hernandez joins the Mets Pod. And when Gary said, hey, have you ever been on the Mets Pod? He said, no, never been on before. I was dying laughing. And I said to my producer, he was on last week. And so my producer, Greg Picker, is like, I'm opening you up. Just call him out on it right now. So that was a great moment.
So many great things happened this season. Yeah, I listed some, 101 win season. Alonso setting the RBI record. Lindor setting a bevy of shortstop records. McNeil batting title. So much happened. I'm probably missing many. What's a moment or two that stands out as your favorite from the 2022 season?
Yeah, I was actually just asked this question on another podcast, and I mean, there are so many. You listed a bunch of them. The combined no-hitter was amazing. I mean, Timmy Trumpet playing live, what that entire thing with Edwin Diaz has become was great. But for me, the moment that still stands out above everything else was early in the season, the come from behind win in the 9th against Philly. It just, for me, it set the tone of what this team is going to be all about. It felt from that moment on like this season was going to really be different. And it was different. I know that it ended with a lot of Mets fans disappointed. I know the team's disappointed with that last stretch, and there's every reason to be, but it shouldn't overshadow the type of accomplishments that we saw this season and the giant leap forward that we saw this season and the potential that still exists for it to remain a special season, one of the most special in the history of the franchise. So for me, there were a lot of them. Old Timers Day was great. Keith's retirement was incredible, but that come from behind win in the 9th against Philly stands out above all else.
Steve, for any team to go from 77 wins to over 100, it obviously speaks to the changes they made in the offseason, besides just the internal improvements. Who do you think out of all of those free agent trade, whether it could be a player that made his debut this year, who do you think was the biggest catalyst for the change for this team?
Max. I mean, Buck Showalter set the tone with, with what he was able to bring experience-wise and attention to detail-wise from a manager's perspective. But I have never in my life seen a starting pitcher have that level of impact on a room on the days that he doesn't pitch. I mean, Max Scherzer truly brought as much to this team off the field and behind the scenes as he did with his fantastic performance on the field. I think the way that he carries himself, the way that he competes, the way that he teaches, it brought so much to the table. I think it also took a lot of pressure off of Francisco Lindor, who tried to be anything and everything a year ago. And to have Max come into that room and really take over, it allowed Lindor to be able to be himself, go out there, just worry about playing. And once he was able to do that, then leading by example, he kind of became that leader that he was trying to be last year anyway. So There were just so many things. Even, we talk about, I mentioned the entire room that Max had an impact on, but even if you look at the pitching staff alone, you can point to each and every member of that starting rotation something directly that Scherzer did to improve somebody else in that rotation, whether it was having Bassett change the way he threw his slider. Honestly, it was all of them changing their slider, particularly Carrasco just listening to what Scherzer was saying about getting behind his slider. That one game where Scherzer really had it working. Carrasco didn't even say anything. He just took that to heart and went and had his best start of the season, and then went into the dugout and said, "Hey, Max, thank you for that. That was me just listening to you." Taijuan Walker, same deal. He changed the way Ty threw his slider. David Peterson, he helped a lot. They had a game going where there was a certain percentage of first pitch strikes that Peterson had to get to, and if he did, then David would win. If he didn't, then Max would win. And once they started doing that, that's when Peterson really turned a corner and started throwing first pitch strikes. So he had such a tangible impact on everybody in that room even you're seeing DeGrom throw his curveball much more. Yeah. That's a Max thing. So he was unbelievable. And we've seen him up close and personal for years with the Nationals, and I had heard, but until you see it up close and personal on a daily basis, you don't fully understand what it means. So without a doubt, it was Scherzer.
So you mentioned Buck kind of in passing at the beginning of that answer. So you've been around for a few managers now with the Mets. What's different about this Buck-led team? Because this team has really just had a different feel all year. You mentioned the comeback against the Phillies kind of feels like a catalyst, but this all has to really just start with Buck. So what's kind of different there?
It starts with Buck and it ends with Buck. The Buck stops there, right? The best way that I can describe it, because we've said this a lot over the course of the season when talking about Buck just amongst ourselves, whether it's the broadcaster, the writers, or radio guys, is you always knew in years past that something was missing, right? I mean, with Rojas, I still think Luis Rojas is going to be a really good major league manager. It was too early for him. It wasn't the right team. It wasn't the right situation for him. Mickey Callaway, we don't even need to get into. I mean, there were plenty of obvious reasons why that didn't work. But even, Terry was great, right? But until you see Buck Showalter, you don't realize what was missing. Like, you knew something was missing, but you don't realize what. And then you see it and you say, that's it. That's what it's supposed to look like. He just has such a command over everything, right? There's not one area where you say, well, he's kind of lacking. He's kind of lacking in-game management or bullpen management or media or this or that. The way he communicates with his players, there's nothing lacking. He handles the media in an impressive way where he's always able to get his message across, whatever he wants to say, without being condescending really, and without throwing his players under the bus. So he's able to walk this tightrope of answering questions, having a good relationship with the media, while also maintaining credibility in that clubhouse. He is incredibly communicative with every player that needs to be talked to. He is always looking at, he talks a lot about the arteries of a decision, right? So you bring up, let's talk about a recent one. You bring up Francisco Alvarez. Okay, well, that's great. But how's that going to affect Mark Vientos, right? Because now his playing time is going to get cut into. So Buck makes sure to have a conversation with him. The way that I did something early this season about bullpen management and how through the first, I think it was like 35, 36 games, he had only used the guy back-to-back 9 times or 10 times. And it was, 25% of what we've seen over the last decade. He has such an ability to lose a battle to win a war, right? He knows that not every game, it's more important sometimes in the long run to keep guys fresh than it is to win that particular night. And the attention to detail, you saw so many things happen this year that you just have never seen before. You saw the multiple times where you got a guy sliding in between first and second base, and it just completely threw the defender for a loop. And those are the types of things. You saw the J.D. Davis was it JD Davis taking off, right?
Yeah.
And Tomas Nido had said something to him when there was that potential what was it, the appeal play, right? It was the appeal play, right? So you talk to so many guys about what Buck brings to the table, and he talked about all of those plays in spring training. He would do something literally where he would spend 10 minutes before a daily meeting showing guys a play that may never come up, or it may come up once in a season or once in a career. But if it happens, be prepared for it. And it's so different than anything we've ever seen before. Or I've ever seen before. So you can't point to one thing, but he has made such an impact on this group. And we've had discussions where people say, like, well, how much does a manager really matter? You can point to Buck Showalter. Like, if you want to take the best manager I've dealt with on the Mets beat versus the worst, I would honestly say that Buck Showalter versus Mickey Callaway, it's a 10-win difference. I really believe that. That's how much it matters. So he's been, again, you asked me about the player, and the player is Max, but the biggest offseason addition, no doubt, was Buck Showalter.
Yeah, that's an incredible difference, especially for the crowd that says managers don't matter in baseball. They don't matter until you realize you have a huge problem with one. So Mets fans, and obviously thanks to you, Steve, have really, picked up on that. Another thing that we really wanted to ask you, as we've watched Edwin Diaz's turnaround this year, it wasn't just a good season. It wasn't just a great season. It was one of the greatest closer seasons we've seen in recent history. So there was always, due to the talent, the expectation that Diaz can get back on track and be a high-end reliever. But this, Steve, I think was unprecedented. What do you think behind the scenes really led to this level of turnaround for Diaz in New York?
Man, it was such a slow build. I think it's hard to say, like, well, this was the moment. But for me, it's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, because there are a lot of guys that would have had that first year in New York, and that's it. They're broken. They can't come back. They need a change of scenery. And Diaz, even if you look at the way he handled that season in real time, he never hid from the media. He was the first. He was standing at his locker every single night when we came into that clubhouse and answered every single question and took accountability. And I think that showed his character right in that moment. And then the way that he worked to get back on track that offseason, and you saw it, like that, Mets fans didn't want to, and rightly so, didn't want to jump back in with him because of what they had experienced for a long time. But he was pretty good in 2020. Yeah. And he was pretty good in 2021. And then he just took it up to an entirely different level in 2022. And I think for Diaz, you talk to him and you talk to guys around him, he's got such unbelievable confidence in himself that even in 2019 wasn't shaken. I think he was more baffled by what was happening, but he still never lost faith that he could get back to where he was. And I think the way that he worked, and I talked to him about what was different even about this offseason, and he talked about the one thing that he felt he needed to clean up was really commanding his pitches, glove side down and away, that same thing that DeGrom works on constantly. And he threw much more in his side sessions in the offseason, down and away to righties, right? That glove side fastball slider combination. And I think once he was able to really command that slider, it changed everything for him, because if he can get ahead, and he was getting ahead so often this year, these guys have no chance. And that's where it was. And you see, he threw more sliders, I think, than he threw fastballs this year, which was a change, because he just had such great feel and such great command. And once that happened, and once you saw the swings that these guys were taking, I just think that confidence that was already there got taken to a whole new level. And he believes the second he comes in there, game's over. Doesn't matter the scenario, doesn't matter the pressure, who he's facing, game's over. And so I think it's a lot of little things, but for me, it all goes back to 2019 and what he was able to do, because I don't think it gets talked about enough. And I don't think it can be overstated how few players would have been able to survive that and come back at all, let alone reach this.
Well, if there's one show that does it, it's this show, because I was backing Edwin Diaz when he wasn't very good. So But let's talk about the playoffs here. So obviously that's where we are. The regular season's in the past. Are you a fan of the rumored plan for the rotation for the wild card of Max going game 1 and game 2 kind of being maybe Bassett if they win, DeGrom if they lose? Because I kind of like it. It's kind of to your Buck point from earlier of thinking big picture. Despite every game being must win in the playoffs, he's still thinking about going forward. What do you think about that?
Am I a fan? I want to take credit for it, but I know there's no way that Buck actually, heard it from me. I tried to actually sell one of our producers on pregame on Monday. The days all get me. So yeah, the first game of the National Series about pitching this plan, but rightly so, he wanted to wait until it was official that they were in the wild card. For me, it's a no-brainer. Actually, you look at why there was so much optimism and still should be so much optimism about what this team can do. And it's Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer and optimizing those two. And I think the disappointment with losing the division is that was now, in essence, taken out of your hands, right? You've got to win the wild card first and foremost, but then you do, and all of a sudden your pitching's not lined up for that Dodger series, and you only get DeGrom and Scherzer twice, and Taijuan Walker is probably starting game 1 unless they sweep, and then it's Bassett starting game 1, and it threw everything into disarray. The way the schedule breaks down, you now have that potential to get that advantage back, right? And you have to be flexible. You have to win game 1 because you can't go out in game 2 with Jacob deGrom never pitching for you. But if you win game 1, you go with Bassett in game 2. The worst case scenario is that Jacob deGrom is pitching a must-win game 3 at home. The best case scenario is that deGrom starts game 1 on regular rest, or on much more than regular rest against the Dodgers. Scherzer gets game 2 on regular rest, and then deGrom gets game 5 if necessary on regular rest, with the possibility of Scherzer coming out of the bullpen in that game if needed as well. So that's how you get the advantage back. And again, if they win game 1, I don't see what is lost by doing it that way, because in that scenario, again, the worst case scenario, deGrom's got to pitch anyway, or Bassett's got to pitch anyway, right? If they lose a game, so you're going to see, again, worst case scenario, you're going to see Jake pitch in game 3, and you still leave open that possibility of having deGrom and Scherzer pitching 3 of 5 against the Dodgers when you're absolutely going to need them. And listen, this is not a team where it's like, it's nice to be here, and if they can somehow sneak through the wild card round, that's great. You do need to be thinking long term, because this team can win a World Series, and that is the goal. That is still the goal in front of them. And so how do you maximize that? You make sure that you do it this way if you win game 1, which is not going to – listen, I think Scherzer is going to come out and shove, but Darvish is going to be an issue as well. So it's not going to be easy to beat this Padres team. But if you do it in game 1, 100% you go to Bassett game 2.
Steve, you're a pro's pro. You know how to segue. I'm going to put you on the spot. Gut feeling, how far do you think this Mets team makes it?
Again, was just asked this question about an hour ago, and I have a very difficult time answering this question. I'm going to kind of cop out a little bit. I think they beat the Padres. I really do. I think for a number of reasons, which I'll get into in just a second, but I think they beat the Padres. I think that they have an epic series with the Dodgers. I think that one's going 5, and it's a coin flip. That's what I think. It's hard. I'm hard pressed to say they're gonna beat the Padres, they're gonna beat the Dodgers, and then they're gonna go beat the Braves in 7 and World Series, here they come. I can absolutely see it happening, but let's not underestimate just how good the Dodgers are. Let's not underestimate just how good the Braves are. So I think they'll be right there. I don't think this is going to end in this epic disappointment of a wild card loss, but I think that I could see it going either way against the Dodgers. Now, the reason, I don't know if you were going to ask this, but I'm going to answer it anyway. The reason why I think they're going to beat the Padres and why it's going to be different is, even though it went the wrong way, I think that series against the Braves was invaluable to this group. I spoke with a number of guys prior to the Friday game, so prior to the series starting. And the number one conversation that stood out to me was the one I had with Trevor May, who has playoff experience. And he said, no matter what happens, we obviously want to win. But if this series goes the other way, it's so critical for so many guys who have never experienced the playoffs before to have a series where you have the stakes without the stakes, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's the stakes, but you get a mulligan, because what he said about the playoffs is, in baseball specifically, you play so many games that oftentimes no one game seems critical. A stretch of time seems critical when you look back at it, but it's very difficult in a season to find a game where it just feels like do or die, everything's on the line. It doesn't happen that often. And then you get to the playoffs for the first time, and it's, oh my God, if I don't come through right now, we're going home. It's a totally different feel for a baseball player. And so to have that experience and get that out of the way, you heard Pete Alonso say after that series, which was not a good series for him, I've never experienced something like that before. I spoke with Brandon Nimmo before the game on Friday. He said he had not been that nervous since opening day, the first opening day he ever experienced. This was different for a lot of these guys. And I think they looked tight. I think they didn't play the same way that we've seen them. And so to get that out of the way, to come in and pummel the Nationals the way that they should have, quite frankly, in September, I think it's enough of a line of demarcation. Okay, that was bad. We got it out of the way. We know what it's like. We're a good team. We won 101 games. Now we're sending Max Scherzer, who knows exactly what this is like, to the mound in game one at Citi Field, a raucous crowd. I do not think there'll be any carryover from the Brave series. And I do think that this team, a team that's been known for its resilience all year, is going to come out with a chip on its shoulder, angry, and play in that way. The Padres are a tough out. They've played the Mets tough. That pitching staff is going to be tough for this team, but I think they find a way to win that series.
Steve, there is no other way to end this conversation than saying, I hope we are talking about this on the Jets pregame desk on Sunday, that the Mets won games 1 and 2, and we are moving forward. Joe, what do you got?
Well, there is actually one way to end it. So you just mentioned Jets pre and post that you guys both do now. I need you, Steve, to grade Connor's suit game, because I'm used to seeing Connor in T-shirt, jeans,
the one time I wear adult clothes.
And
it's blown me. What do you think? You've seen it. It's blown me. I mention Connor's attire on the air every week. It's incredible.
Thank you guys.
I think he bailed on the green tie too quick.
You know what I think he bailed on too quick?
They lost.
The black on black was great with the blue. The blue suit. And I, as someone who has my entire life tried to make black on black work, and then I got married, and without even asking me, my wife threw my black shirt and black tie away because it looked so bad on me. To see somebody rock it the way that he did, now I know. Now it's like, okay, my wife Julie did the right thing, because I can't pull it off the way that he can, but that's what it looks like when you're pulling it off. So I've been blown away by the analysis. I've been blown away by the suit. I've been blown away by the hair. The hair in person is a different beast.
Connor is too nice and too stylish. I tried to get Jerry Blevins to make a jab at Connor's hair last week on the show. He said how great his hair was. I figured you could get after him about the suits. The
suits
suits
are
are great.
good.
Look at that lettuce. Everybody. You make it. You would only be making fun if you want it. Like only be. It would be based out of jealousy. I want that hair. I want that hair.
Gelbs, you are the best, man. I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for, obviously your support, stopping by the show, and the craziest week the Mets have had in a very, very long time. That's about to get a lot crazier. Joe and I will be at Citi Field Friday night. We know.
All right.
So it's going to be full throttle here on the Mets pod, so thank you, man.
You got it, man. Of course. I'll see you guys on Friday, and hopefully I'll see you on Sunday too, Connor.
That's right.
All right, guys.
Great stuff from Gelbs. Was awesome to finally have him on the Mets pod. Joe, what a time as well to have Gelbs on, recapping a season that, sure, let's be honest, a lot of Mets fans have been in big disappointment because they didn't win the division. This team won 101 games, coming off a year where they won 77 games, and as you and I always talk about on this podcast, it's a new era under Steve Cohen. It's a new era in a lot of places, whether it's the investments they make behind the scenes, the front-facing investments on players. This year was undoubtedly awesome, this regular season. Watching the Mets consistently win. The fact that they never went into a real downward spiral. The Mets never had a funk where they lost 4 or 5 games in a row in itself is an unbelievable feat. So, Joe, just big picture thoughts on what we watched with the 2022 Mets before the playoffs start.
Yeah, big picture. This is the best regular season of my life. literally, because
Same.
they won 101 games, second most in franchise history. There's no doubt it's a disappointment what happened in Atlanta. I understand, obviously, everything that the fans feel for that, and you would love, we talked about on the show that it was important to win the division so you can line up the pitching the way you want to, and just not having to go through that extra series. Didn't work out that way, and it's, to me, that's a tip of the hat to Atlanta, the way they played that series. They played perfect baseball. There's a reason they also won 101 games and won the World Series last year. They're a great team. The Mets are also a great team. We had records, like I mentioned in the question of Gelbs, Alonso setting an RBI record, Lindor scattering the shortstop records, the no-hitter.
McNeil won a batting title.
Not just won a batting title, he's the first Met to ever lead all of baseball in batting. And also these 101 wins, the most wins in a season in Buck Showalter's managerial career. So this is the best manager season of a potential Hall of Fame type manager's career. So all in all, I think it was absolutely a fantastic season. The disappointment at the end is definitely something, but I think you can kind of have a two-track mind, right? Where it's like you could be disappointed that exact outcome didn't work out, but also appreciate a lot of the great things that happened. And I think Mark Canna said it best the other day when they showed up to Port St. Lucie in February. Their goal wasn't to win the National League East. Their goal was to win the World Series. And that path is still alive. While a little more difficult, a little harder, maybe a little more arduous, it's still right in front of them. And they have the recipe. Jake, Max, Bassett, Edwin Diaz at the end of games, and enough of an offense, I think, to make it work. So that's a long way of saying fantastic season. Slight disappointment here at the end. But I think as we separate a few days from it and we're getting ready to go to Citi Field on Friday for the first game of the wild card, I think it's now time to, kind of move past that and just say, we are where we are. Let's take care of business.
Yeah, you can't feel sorry for yourselves, right? When massive implications are on the line. The Mets are in the playoffs. That's really important. Joe, it's fun. You brought up the best regular season of our lifetime. And before that, you and I always often go back to the 2006 team. Despite the 2015 making it to a World Series, that was a very unique situation. The 2006 team won 97 games, 4 less than this one. That year, the Phillies came in second place in the East. They won 85. The Mets won the division by 12 games. This year, they exceeded that win total by 4, tied with the Braves, but lost on the tiebreaker. It just goes to show you, the Braves are really good. You can say that, right? The Braves are really good. I think something that you and I constantly talked about leading up to this season, before opening day ever even happened, especially during the lockout when we had a lot of long shows where we had time to kill. The Mets built this team with their resources, a lot of them financially, for the postseason, for the opportunity going into a series that you can have Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer pitching back-to-back. Or, in this case, as we are going to see, the flexibility to even spread them out and set somebody up to come in relief help later on. So this is a team that they made it to the postseason. Now, none of the rest matters now, right? The postseason is a fresh start to the year. Yes, the Mets have a longer road to get there. We have been clear about that. A longer, tougher road to get there. But guess what? You are probably always going to have to go through the Dodgers. So if you beat the Padres and say, well, now they got to play the Dodgers in the NLTS, you are going to have to go down this road anyway, eventually, at some point. This team is... Now, Starling Marte being out is undoubtedly a big injury. And everybody's got them. Everybody's got injuries. The Braves are without Spencer Strider right now, and Ozzie Albies probably isn't coming back in October. We'll see. So everybody's got their injuries. The Dodgers as well. This is a really, really good Mets team. As we said, they have a batting title champ on the roster right now. They have an RBI machine as the 3 and 4 or 2 and 3 spots, however they bat them in Lindor and Alonso. I mean, really, really good pitching. The best closer in baseball. Like, put the excuses off the table and don't look back to the, deGrom's, hasn't been himself the last couple starts, or Scherzer hasn't been lights out, or Bassett had a bad start. All those things are true. But you always say this, since you and I have started doing Mets podcasting. You are what the back of your baseball card says. Max Scherzer has a long, long history of being a dominant starting pitcher with tons of experience in the playoffs. Jacob deGrom has been waiting to be back there for how long right now? This is a moment for the Mets that, listen, are we, optimistic on this podcast? Yeah, at times, I'm a Mets fan. I'm optimistic at this time. They've been waiting for this moment. They've built this team for this moment where you have to put the doom and gloom from a 3-game series behind you and get ready to move forward because you still have a chance to win a World Series.
You absolutely still have a chance. Like you said, it's a little harder, but hey, in a best case scenario, you just have to win 2 more games than everybody else. I mean, in the scheme of things, that's not too bad, right? Just a couple more. But it definitely makes it, a little more difficult. But I totally agree with you that the way this team was built was with an eye towards October. They signed Max Scherzer. Obviously, you have Jacob deGrom. And just think, too, they went from 77 wins last year to 101 wins this year. So that's, a 24-game improvement in 1 year, in the second year of this ownership. And not to mention, in that 101 win season, they didn't have Jake until the end of July or real beginning of August. Max, when you take both of his IL stints together, basically missed like 7 weeks. And they still did it. So it just shows how good this team is and how well put together they were by Billy Epler and this front office. And if nothing else, this is going to work out how it does. We know how the playoffs are kind of its own season. The Mets could, lose this weekend. The Mets could go to the World Series or something in between. I think one thing to take from this is a sign when you look forward with the Mets that this doesn't feel like the old Mets where they make the playoffs 1 year and then maybe 5 or 6 years later they might make it again. Like, this is a team that's going to be built to win now. They're going to win. They're going to play to win next year, the year after. This is going to be a year in, year out thing with the investment from ownership. Not only, like we said, on the players on the field, everything with the infrastructure. Like, this front office, they're going to keep building that analytics department. They're going to keep investing in player development, amateur and professional scouting. The top of the chain, Billy Epler's the GM. A new team president is coming in with Sandy Alderson stepping aside. Maybe a president of baseball operations is coming in at some time. So this is, I think, a sign for Mets fans to realize, enjoy this run, but realize that they are building for this to be a consistent thing. And, they may not win 100 games every year, but I'm going to tell you, mark this down. The next time the Mets win 100 games, they will not be in the wild card game. They will win the division because the odds of having 2 100-plus win teams in a division are very low.
I mean, yeah, it's a anomaly, right? It is. And there's no point in sitting here and complaining about it or defending it or any of this and that. I'll say this, too. I did find it really interesting on the broadcast, the last broadcast of the Mets regular season. Ronnie said that, being around Dusty Baker, he said Dusty has real fears of that 5-day layoff. And this isn't me saying, I'd rather be in the wild card than not have the layoff. But this is a new playoff format, and everybody has eyes on how teams are going to adjust with the time off or how some teams come in that wild card round and get hot. So that's one more thing to keep an eye on, and it's going to be crazy to watch. Reminder, you are listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, time for a little preview of the Mets Padres Wild Card round, and who better to join us than Kevin Acee from the San Diego Union-Tribune. Kevin, I know you are wrapping up some travel over here to our lovely East Coast. How you doing, man?
Fantastic. Much better to be here in the fall than in the summer. Got to be honest.
That's an absolute right-on take that I agree with as well. So I wanted to start by asking you, so much has been made of the pitching matchups in this series. Both teams not, showing their deck of cards completely. The Mets' struggles with Darvish have been well documented. The Mets have revealed Max Scherzer is going to start. But looking a little bit far ahead, Blake Snell and Joe Musgrove have been awesome for San Diego. How does the team, have that argument or that debate of who to roll with going into Game 2, and is a little bit of it scenario-based?
I think that we're looking at Snell, then Musgrove if necessary. Then obviously Musgrove could be your Game 1 starter, just like,
right.
Conversely for the Mets if Game 3 isn't necessary. Snell is a playoff guy. Snell's the second half of the season guy. Snell has just been locked in lately. I don't have a lot of answers for what is the problem with Snell going up and down, but that doesn't matter because here we are in October and this is Snell's time. the way that it's been kind of portrayed is that speculating on Darvish, Snell, Musgrove, I'm not going to be wrong. So, but, this cagey stuff, who knows?
So obviously we're around the Mets every day, so we have strong opinions of everything going on here, and our fans certainly have strong opinions on what's going on here. But I always like to look when we have a chance to talk to someone on the other side. What do people with the Padres think about playing the Mets?
The pitching is the first thing they talk about. I mean, obviously, that's the thing. And their offense has been inconsistent is the best word that I can describe. That said, did come in and beat Scherzer. Now, of course, that said, Eric Hosmer hit a 2-run home run, and Eric Hosmer is not with the Padres anymore. There are no good numbers, really, against Max Scherzer, except for small sample size. Josh Bell, Juan Soto, when they were with the Nationals, smallest of small sample sizes. Manny Machado does not do well. There are no good numbers. There's a kid on their team who was just added to the roster named Brandon Dixon, who will probably be on the postseason roster. I think he was 1 for 3 with a homer. You're not starting him. So, look, Daniel Camarena will not be on this team, who had a grand slam off of Max last year. So that's the first thing they talk about without any question whatsoever, given the Mets pitching and the Padres offense. Now, the Padres, by the way, have done better than average against better pitchers. The Padres actually have been embarrassed by many pitchers making their MLB debuts this year, but you go against, Dylan Cease and you score 4 runs. That's the kind of the Padres' MO.
Baseball is a weird game.
Yep.
We were having the same exact arguments on the Mets side where James McCann, who Mets fans don't even want on the playoff roster, has good numbers against Darvish while nobody else seems to. So we can relate to that, Kevin. So we know the Padres are a really, really good team. They have star power in the lineup, tons of star power, obviously in the rotation as well. What is viewed as the biggest weakness, though, with this San Diego team heading into the postseason?
Depth of the bench. Like I said, the inconsistency of the offense. They've had some players. There's a guy, Jake Cronenworth. He's a fantastic player, and he's a guy who makes things happen. Be that, sacrificed fly, obviously his defense, whatever it is that this guy has to do. But he has underachieved this year, and that's a guy that, for length in your lineup, at least from far away, I see that length in the Mets lineup, though I do see a lot of similarities, their ability to go cold also. But the Padres did not have, and obviously one of the losses, the loss of the season, Fernando Tatis Jr., but just the length of the lineup. And then, of course, that then says, well, the depth. Now, they do have some names. I mean, Josh Bell has not been the same guy since he came to the Padres that he was the first part of the season with the Nationals. But that's a guy who, okay, I guess he could hit. They have a bunch of guys like that. Will Myers, I guess he could hit. That's kind of the Padres.
So Juan Soto was obviously the big prize. The Padres emptied the farm largely, got rid of a lot of premium young talent for him. And he hasn't had normal Juan Soto numbers since joining the Padres. What have you seen from him as the summer progressed? Because obviously it was really rough at first, and he's turned it on a bit. But what have you seen from Soto over the last 2 months as a Padre?
There was a time, and it was the worst 15-game stretch of his career, like by far. It was sort of unbelievable. Lately, back to sort of being the Juan Soto that even the outs are hard. There's been 1 homer. There's no extra base hits. It's really weird. Like you when you think you kind of know it, you don't. Like, is he seeing better pitches because he's batting in front of? Or is he seeing more pitches? But then you go, no, he's not. He says that it's just been a weird year. I got to figure this out before next year. Like what's been so weird about this year for Juan Soto? There were new coaches in Washington. Then he came to this new team. So, all right, I get that. He put a lot on himself. Look, there was a lot expected. The first night that those guys were here, and it was an electric night. San Diego, the fans have responded really well, but that night was different. Like, they were there 2 hours when the gates opened. They were in there and they were cheering like it as soon as he came on the field. I mean, the expectations were so incredibly high. And you remember his comment that he feels sorry for other pitchers, and I applaud him for that. But it hasn't worked out like that. And he's a man of great pride, as he should be. And I just think that this has kind of weighed heavy on him. He also is not that player. I think he's a player that over the course of a season that you really appreciate what Juan Soto does. I mean, gets on base 40% of the time. All right. Hits you 25 bombs. All right. That's awesome. He's not Fernando Tatis Jr. dramatic moment, or at least he hasn't been for the Padres. So, look, had a good postseason in 2019, didn't he? So that's kind of what they're looking for now.
Another big addition at the deadline, Josh Hader. I mean, what a wild ride it's been for Hader with the Padres. And I feel like a lot of people have actually missed this. After the August meltdown, Hader has not given up an earned run since September 5th. We are sitting here in October, Kevin. So I just have to ask the simple question, and they might not have a choice. What is the trust level with Hader going into the series?
Well, they don't have a choice, so you're right about that. But also, it's one run too. So I mean, it's I think that was an extra innings that he gave up the run. They identified before they even got him that there were some things mechanically that they wanted to fix. But you don't say, "Hey, Josh, good to meet you. I'm Ruben Niebla, the pitching coach. Let's fix you." You kind of got to let it play out a little bit, and it played out worse than anyone could have imagined, obviously. Then he found the fastball. All right, and it was like all fastball. It was remarkable, like 90% fastball. And slowly the sliders come back. He's introduced a change. He ended a game on a change, like an 11-pitch at bat against Ty France. He's thrown it a couple more times since. I mean, this is the Josh Hader that I watched dominate the Padres for 3 years. Every time he came in, you said, all right, I can file my story now. That's what's happened here the last, I think it's 8 appearances. But I mean, in terms of the real trust, the last 4 or 5 appearances, you're like, okay, because it's been against the Dodgers. He's actually faced really good teams and done pretty well.
Last one for you, Kevin. Gut feeling, going to put you on the spot. What's your prediction? Who wins the series, the Mets or the Padres?
This is so hard when you're so inside it, and you have I feel like everyone's in this spot. Maybe not but if you cover a team like the Dodgers or Mets, or the Padres or the Mets, you see all the weaknesses, right? And you just naturally envision all the things that can go wrong if you're facing Scherzer, Bassett, DeGrom, and it's hard for me to see this Padres team doing well enough offensively to win this. That said, it's a really good team. If you're asking me, I would take, I'll take the Mets in 3. I'm probably focusing a little too much on the deficiency of the Padres. I think this could really be a fantastic series where, like, in the 8th and 9th inning, all 3 games, or like the 7th, 8th, 9th, all 3 games, we're like, wow, this is playoff baseball. That's that's what I'm hoping for and kind of what I envision. But it's just this offense has just not done enough.
Yeah, we're with you, Kevin. We think it's going to be a grind. I think everybody would be surprised if this thing does not go into Sunday. But we're happy to welcome you here to New York. Thanks so much for jumping on the show today, and best of luck this weekend.
Take care.
All right, a big thank you to Kevin Acee from the San Diego Union-Tribune. Does a great job covering the team, and it was great to have him on our show, Joe. And hey, you put him on the spot. You made him pick, and we were laughing that it sounded like he was talking about the Mets at times. It feels like the Padres are viewed by the people so close to the team in a similar way as the Mets, where you go, man, they got great frontline starting pitching. We don't know who's going to show up for this lineup. We're expecting more out of this guy. A bullpen that, it's not fair this year recently to compare Hader to Diaz, but there was a time where both guys were viewed as the most lights-out ninth-inning guys in baseball, and obviously Diaz is having a career kind of year, while Hader has been a total roller coaster, but seems like he's figured it out. So, Joe, looking at this series, let's start with Game 1. Scherzer is going to be on the mound. Citi Field is going to be packed and loud on a Friday night. What do you think is the most important thing for the Mets to address early, whether it's somebody hitting a home run in the first 3 innings, or whether it's the pitchers to show, hey, Atlanta was a bit of an anomaly. We are some of the best guys left in October?
I'm going to say it's going to fall largely on the offense is what I want to see, because honestly, it's Max Scherzer. Yeah, he didn't pitch good against Atlanta. I don't know how anyone can truly believe. Like, I understand pessimism and worry and all that comes with playoff baseball. You're worried about every single game, but I don't think anyone can actually truly believe like Max Scherzer is just gonna crap the bed or something. Like, he's Max Scherzer. Like, I believe Max Scherzer is gonna show up and he's gonna be Max. The key is gonna be Darvish has had the Mets number, and what the Mets need to do is capitalize something early. It could be a home run. That would be fantastic. But get runners on, drive a couple runs in, maybe get a sac fly. Like, just do something, because I think if you let Darvish just go 1-2-3 in the first, 1-2-3 in the second, that confidence is there. Like, we're aware that Darvish has the Mets number. I am certain that Darvish knows that he has the Mets number. So if you let him kind of take care of you really quick, I think that will set the precedent that for his confidence to go through that game. So I think the offense needs to step up. And, it was funny you mentioned that when we were talking to Kevin, it just sounded like he was talking about the Mets. And when we think about this lineup, it's obviously been inconsistent from time to time. And not having Starling Marte, more likely than not, is obviously a massive loss.
Especially against Snell.
Against Snell, especially, for sure. But I could go back and I could think, in 2016, the last time the Mets were in the playoffs, they played in the wild card game, which, thank God, it's not a wild card game anymore. It's a wild card series. If we think there's a problem with the Mets offense in 2022, let me read you the 2016 wild card lineup. Batting leadoff at third base, Jose Reyes. Batting second
in 2016, by the way.
Yeah.
2016, Jose Reyes.
2016, when he kind of made his comeback after everything was done. Shortstop, batting second, as Asdrubal Cabrera. Batting third was Yoenis Cespedes in left. Granderson in center. Batting fifth, playing second base, was TJ Rivera. In a playoff game, no offense to TJ Rivera, he was the 5-hole hitter. Jay Bruce in right. Rene Rivera behind the plate. James Loney at first.
That's the one that I cannot get over it when I saw it.
And Noah Syndergaard on the mound. So I think, all things considered, while the Mets offense is imperfect this year, we're not looking at that kind of lineup. I don't even know how that team was in a wild card round. I mean, I know they had some injuries, but I'm excited for this weekend. Like you and I said, we're gonna be there on Friday night. So maybe we'll meet up. Maybe we'll tweet out to have some people come meet us somewhere. I know we've had quite a few people tweet just wanting to say hi to us. So really excited for this weekend. I feel good about the Mets' chances because of their pitching, and they just need to do enough offensively, and I think that's their recipe for success.
Loney did not play in the big leagues after that game. For perspective, he started at first base for the Mets in the playoffs. He bounced around, I think, plenty of minor league systems, went out to the KBO, played for the Sugarland Skeeters. I mean, it's remarkable. So when you look at it like that, it's like, yeah, now Pete Alonso is playing first base for the Mets. But in all seriousness, you look at Darvish, right? Darvish in September has been consistently pitching deep into games. He hasn't made a start where he went less than 6 innings. He's gone into 8. He's pitched 8 innings. He's pitched 7. This has been going on actually for a very long time. Darvish has been hitting 6 to 8 innings almost all summer right now. And the theme with him is he, number one, is highly effective, but he can pitch deep into games. Darvish goes over 100 pitches like 3 out of his every 4 starts at this point. Knowing that, if you're the Mets and how effective Darvish has been specifically against you, now let's be fair. The Mets lineup that couldn't get anything going against him is not this lineup. There are little reasons to be optimistic, but when it comes down to it, you have to get on him early, even if it's working counts and getting runners on base, even if you only get a run or 2 in those first 3 to 4 innings, but you work up the pitch count, because he's a guy that will routinely go deep into games, and you need to get to their bullpen in this one because of your lack of effectiveness against him. So, I mean, I know it sounds like such a simple theory, but that's been the Mets largely in part this year. When they get on guys early, they close out ball games. But if they go into this funk of not being effective at all, they just don't seem to have that counterpunch to get the pitcher out in the 5th or 6th inning.
Travis Blankenhorn DH'd in a game against Yu Darvish for the Mets. So slightly different circumstances, but we've talked about this on the show over the last couple of weeks that there's a shorter leash on starters in the playoffs. So like you said, if you could work some counts, scratch out a couple runs, like in an ideal world, the Padres want to push Yu Darvish to 105 pitches and 7 innings of great ball. But if you can build up that pitch count and get 2-3 runs early, they're going to take him out. And the Mets would do the same for Max or Jake or whoever they have pitching. It's the nature of the playoffs. You don't allow these pitchers time to figure it out throughout a game. If it's not working the way we want it to, we're out and we're into the bullpen. That's how playoff baseball works. So it's imperative, like you said, to build up that pitch count and scratch out some runs. Because I don't think you're not. I mean, maybe they do, but I wouldn't bank on the Mets, lighting up Yu Darvish. But if you could just scratch out a couple runs, it's definitely going to go a long way.
Joe, the Mets with the two Mets with the highest OPS against Darvish, the only Mets with an OPS over 800 against Darvish. James McCann, which has been well documented, 10 at-bats against Darvish. He's got 4 hits, a double and 2 home runs, 5 RBIs. He's also drawn a walk against them. The other one, which makes me so sad, is Starling Marte, who is 7 for 17 against Darvish. So the bottom line is, obviously players like McNeil and Lindor need to be better against Darvish. That's like your no-brainer moment. But the big thing to watch is, how does Vogelbach do against Darvish? How does the resurgent Eduardo Escobar do against Darvish? Because the Escobar that faced him earlier in the year is a much different guy right now. So those are the big takeaways. The other thing is knowing, after talking to Kevin, it's probably Snell in Game 2, which I'm sure some of it also has to do with the fact that the Mets traditionally struggle against lefties, especially once again without Marte. But Snell is a guy, unlike Darvish, that you can bounce early from games.
You can. He's historically been a great postseason pitcher, so we'll see if kind of that shows up. I mean, there's guys that just do it in the postseason. I always remember, we always can go back to El Duque. Like, that's the first, like, if you ask me to name a pitcher who's just always money in the postseason, El Duque is the first name that comes to mind, and Snell has been that way. But what's going to be really interesting, because we saw in the Atlanta series, he's kind of overdoing it. In the National series, he looked like the kind of player that he's capable of being. Like, Francisco Alvarez has to be the designated hitter in Game 2 against Blake Snell.
Well, let me tell you something. Who do you think, which Met has the highest OPS against Blake Snell?
I think I saw this on Twitter.
And I know it's not a great argument, but it has to be said.
Was it Darren Ruff?
You betcha.
Okay, great. Francisco Alvarez has the DH on Saturday. And
I agree, by the way. I agree.
And I mean, if are they gonna put Darren Ruff in like right field or something? I don't know, but I think that you look at Francisco Alvarez. I think he's a guy that in the Atlanta series, it seemed like he was definitely trying to hit the ball 500 feet every single swing.
He swings like it's a troll's club, and it's funny because his nickname is El Troll, but that's what he swings like.
Yeah, and largely he's going for it when he swings. He's never cheated up there, but you need this. I'm looking forward to hopefully having him in the lineup at DH because he provides kind of that best potential to make an impact from someone you're not expecting. Because we're going to talk about Lindor and McNeil and Alonso and Nimmo and all these guys. Like, Alvarez is going to be shoved into like the 7-hole or 8-hole as DH, and he has the opportunity, if there's a guy or two on, 3-run home run.
Swing as hard as you can.
Swing as hard as you can, but I'm very interested to see if he makes this playoff roster. I think he has to, and if he does, he better be in that lineup on Saturday.
All right, let's close out the show with your mailbag questions, as we always do. This is no better time to ask this one from Eric De Jesus. He says, a guess for who will be the postseason hero for the Mets, if there is one.
So I don't. When I think big picture, I think the Mets have a chance to go all the way. And we talk about a postseason hero, and I think we often think like, who's someone under the radar because you kind of expect stars to be stars or whatever. I think Francisco Lindor is going to have a massive postseason. I know it's kind of been a little funky over the last, few days for him in the big spots, but throughout the season, he's seemingly always come up in the clutch in the big spot, and he's embraced New York. New York has embraced him. This, to me, I don't know, maybe it's just a gut feeling, but my gut feeling is it just feels like it's Francisco Lindor's time, and I think this postseason, as long as the run goes, and I think it could go very, very long, I think Francisco Lindor is going to be a huge factor in that.
He has plenty of postseason success on his resume already because Lindor made his postseason debut as a 22-year-old, and he went to the postseason 3 years in a row in that span, 22, 23, and 24 years old. Throughout that span, he hit 5 postseason home runs. We all know about Lindor's moments against, the Yankees. I think the recency bias is a real problem for a lot of people with Lindor because he had a tough series in Atlanta. Lindor is a big game player for the Mets the entire year. Big game player. He kind of accepted and welcomed those moments. And now at Citi Field, not in Atlanta, at Citi Field in this series, this is his time to once again redefine those moments and be the big game player that the Mets thought they were getting. So I'm with you there, Joe. I like Lindor as a choice. To go a different direction, I'm actually going to say Mark Canha for the wild card. I'm not going to say for the entire postseason, but I think Mark Canha, who has had a lot of success against Blake Snell, I think Mark Canha is in for a pretty big weekend. Canha's a guy that did have a lot of big moments. It's funny when you look at his numbers compared to the moments you remember with Canha this year, and he did cool off, it felt like, a little bit in September, but Canha's a guy that it seems like he's always up in huge moments, and I think he's going to be primed and ready to go for this one.
Canha's probably one of the best picks kind of to be that guy that maybe you're not expecting to have big moments, and then he does. So, yeah, I like it. And, when you look up and down this lineup, while they're inconsistent, there's very few spots that you're like, there's no chance that guy's going to have success in the playoffs. And I think that gives them the opportunity to have potentially multiple kind of different postseason heroes. And, if they progress past the wild card round, I wonder, is Starling Marte able to play in the NLDS? It's tough. I don't know exactly where that finger's at, but it feels like a thing like once his finger feels good, he's just going to go play. And
100%.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if that happens. And then if they're there, boy, a 5-game series with the Dodgers with a full Mets lineup, including Starling Marte and the pitching, man, that's playoff baseball.
It'll be electric. This next one from Clay Senator, he said, lineup question, are you going Nido or McCann, who, dare I say, has looked almost alive at catcher? And do you roll with Alvarez Friday versus Darvish after he showed signs of life? So, versus the Nats with the homer and the double. I think, ultimately, McCann's going to play one of these 2 games, right? And I think that wasn't a given a week ago. I think, number one, McCann's numbers are going to get him into one of those games because he is actually hit against both Darvish and Snell, which is just mind-blowing. When you look at all the Mets' problems against San Diego's pitching, it's James McCann that is consistently one of the top guys against those 2 guys. I don't think he's going to start both games, Joe. I do think Nido is going to start one of the games. So I'll throw to you. Do you think McCann gets a game, and do you think it's Friday when they need every little ounce of help they can get against Darvish?
That's an interesting one. I didn't quite realize the level of success that McCann has had against both those pitchers. And if that's the case, I think Buck has historically played to those trends. So that would lead me to believe that McCann will probably play one of the 2 games. And I know that's not exactly answering his question, but I think you'll see both of them play this weekend, I would imagine. And as far as Alvarez goes, I think they acquired Daniel Vogelbach to face the right-handed pitching as the DH, and I think that's what you'll see game 1. But if the Padres go to a lefty out of the bullpen, Buck showed it in the Atlanta series. He is not afraid, no matter what inning it is, to take Vogelbach out and put Alvarez in. So I wouldn't be shocked if you saw Alvarez in the game on Friday night, but I would expect Vogelbach starting.
It is fascinating to watch the clear level of trust or hope or faith, whatever it is.
Real quick.
With Alvarez that quickly.
Yeah.
Compared to Vientos, it always felt like, training wheels have been on. And for the 20-year-old and Alvarez, it feels like that hasn't been the case at all, which, it's frustrating that he had to be dropped in that series. He didn't have any chance to get going beforehand. So I'll close out with this question, Joe. And we've gotten a million roster questions. This one from Joey D. He said, does Alvarez or Vientos make the roster with Ruff possibly coming off the IL? Well, you and I have texted about this, and you have been very vocal. You don't see a way that Alvarez is not on the wild card roster.
I'd be surprised, honestly, especially after his showing in the Washington series. I feel like you don't bring Francisco Alvarez up for these last 6 games of the regular season to just be like, great, we got you a couple games, now go hang out. Like, I think he's going to be on it. I would say, given the series and how it's set up, they can go short on the pitching side, which I think opens the opportunity for Vientos or Ruff. And Buck has shown, since Mark Vientos got called up a month ago when Starling Marte got hurt, that he trusts Darren Ruff over Mark Vientos. So if Darren Ruff is ready to go, Darren Ruff will be on the roster over Vientos. I think that's probably pretty painfully obvious. But if Alvarez is not on the roster, regardless of Ruff or Vientos, that would definitely come as a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, listen, as much as we've been tough on Ruff, rightfully so, on this show, I think you have to still roll with him over Vientos if he's healthy for playoff experience and the fact that hopefully this helped him clear his head. So, Joe, we asked both our guests. So there's no way we get off without asking ourselves. Prediction time. I will start with you. We don't have to do, because we're not going anywhere, everybody. This is a podcast that doesn't take time off or anything like that. We're not going anywhere. So we only have to do wild card before we are back on next week again. Wild card prediction, Joe, for the series, Mets-Padres.
The Mets are going to win the wild card round, and the Mets are going to win the wild card round in 2 games. We will not be playing on Sunday.
God,
There will be 2 days off heading into the LA series for the NLDS. I believe the Mets, while the Padres pitching is fantastic, I mean, we talked to Kevin about it. Darvish, he's been great against the Mets. Joe Musgrove, Blake Snell. I'm riding Max Scherzer, Jacob deGrom, and Chris Bassett in whatever order it ends up being. I'm riding those 3 guys in any short series, and I believe the Mets offense will do enough, and they'll get the ball to Edwin Diaz, and you get the ball in Edwin Diaz's hands, like Steve Gelbs said, game over. I mean, I hope that doesn't come back to bite me. But Edwin Diaz has been fantastic. I believe in this Mets team, and I submitted my predictions to SNY, and I think they're going to be putting out a bunch of people's predictions, and you'll see kind of how I feel about this Mets team. So I think they will take this series.
I'm with you. I think it's going to be in 3 games, though. I think we're in for a dogfight. I think it's going to be stressful. I do think the Mets will ultimately take care of business, but I think it's going to take a DeGrom start in Game 3 to do so. I think they're going to be feeding off the adrenaline Friday. I just think the Padres are going to be a tough out. But ultimately, I think the Mets get it done. I do think this lineup does enough. I think the starting pitching comes back to what they actually are compared to the Atlanta series. So when we record next week, I am fully expecting us to be previewing the NLDS against the Dodgers with a mini happy recap of the Mets beating the Padres in 3 games. So that wraps up our show. Thank you so much, everybody. It's a huge weekend ahead. We are excited. We can't wait to talk to you soon. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week. Go Mets.